Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're going to talk about what happens when your own blood turns cold and what you do when you're too old to fight but too proud to be pushed out. Picture this. You've just returned home from heart surgery. Your chest feels like it's been zippered shut with fire. Your legs barely hold you and your breath has the weight of bricks. You sit down, trying not to wince. The house you bought, built, paid for. It's all here. So is your daughter, her husband, the very people you gave everything for. You ask for one thing, a glass of water. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I do here, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love knowing who's out there when we get into stories like this. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. Could you bring me a glass of water? That's all I said. Not a lecture, not a complaint, not a demand. Just a tired, cracked request from a man whose heart had stopped twice 5 days ago. I was barely able to lift my arms without feeling like I'd been punched in the chest, so the kitchen across the room might as well have been a canyon. My daughter Haley was in the kitchen doorway, halfway through unloading groceries. Things, I might add, I'd paid for the last 3 times. Her expression changed instantly. A muscle twitched in her jaw. She didn't say, "Sure, Dad." She didn't say, "Of course." What she said was, "We're not your servants." And let me tell you, that sentence hit harder than any scalpel they used on me in that hospital. I blinked at her. Honestly, I thought she was joking at first. We used to joke like that. But she wasn't smiling. Neither was her husband, Keon, who didn't even look away from the TV. The remote rested on his lap like it was part of him now. I looked back at Haley. I wanted to say, "You're not my servant, you're my daughter." But the words got stuck in the place just below my healing sternum and just above my broken heart. I tried again. "I just got home, Haley, from surgery. The doctor said I need to stay off my feet." She rolled her eyes like I'd just asked her to donate a kidney. "The kitchen's right there, Dad. You've got legs." An odd thing about growing old. You don't stop loving your children, even when they talk to you like you're something they stepped over on the sidewalk. Your love just gets quieter, sadder, and deeper, like water soaking into wood. I tried to stand up. The surgical site pulled like it was trying to tear open. My knees buckled slightly. And for a second, I honestly thought I'd fall. "Oh, great," Haley muttered. "Now he's going to fall and sue us or something." Sue them. In my own house. That's when the pain in my chest wasn't from the stitches anymore. It was from understanding. I wasn't Dad anymore. I was a legal liability. There's a strange thing about aging. Everyone talks about how you lose your strength, your speed, your memory. But no one warns you about the moment you realize your place in your own family has quietly been erased while you were too busy paying the bills. I made it to the kitchen. I did. Poured myself some water with hands that used to build houses, pour foundations, lay roofing. My fingers shook, and the water sloshed out onto the counter. No one rushed to help. No one even flinched. The water hit my lips, and it might as well have been vinegar. Because what I tasted wasn't water. It was the knowledge that I had raised a child who now saw me as a chore. Let me tell you something else about old men. We remember everything. Not the new stuff where we put our reading glasses or whether we took our pills, but the old stuff. It's burned into us. I remembered every time I sat by her bed with a wet cloth when she had a fever, every time I brought her hot cocoa after nightmares, every peanut butter sandwich cut diagonally because she said it tasted better that way. And now, when I needed one small kindness, I got cruelty instead. Let me share something about elder psychology here, an academic argument, if you will. Studies in gerontology show that aging parents subjected to neglect or emotional abuse by adult children experience faster cognitive and physical decline. But what the studies don't measure is how fast the heart hardens against the people who used to be its whole world. I returned to my chair and sipped the water like it was poison. Keon laughed at something on TV, a cheap sitcom, and for some reason, I pictured a jellyfish farting in space. Don't ask me why. My mind works in odd metaphors when I'm wounded. Haley was back at the dining table, clicking through her phone, her wedding ring catching the sunlight like a mocking little disco ball. I gave her that ring. Paid for the wedding, for the car, for this house. I even paid when her husband's business idea failed and they needed $5,000 to avoid bankruptcy. Now I was a burden with a heart problem. And here's a wild fact for you. Octopuses have 3 hearts, and when they mate, they die soon after. One final gift, then they're gone. Humans only get 1 heart, but some of us keep giving it long after it should have stopped. I sat back. My chest throbbed. The water glass was empty. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that something in this house had changed. I wasn't a guest here. I was an intruder. The glass clinked gently as I set it down on the side table. My fingers hovered over it for a moment longer than necessary, as if letting go of it meant surrendering some part of myself. In a way, it did. That sip of water, the one I had to retrieve like a thief in my own home, was more than hydration. It was proof. Proof that something unspoken had hardened in the walls of this house. And now, I had finally tasted it. I leaned back in my chair and watched them, Haley and Keon. They weren't whispering or plotting, not yet, just existing, as if nothing monumental had just happened. As if they hadn't just told a man with fresh surgical tape across his chest to get his own damn glass of water. Keon flipped through TV channels like the fate of the universe rested on finding the right one. Haley was texting. Her fingers tapped with practiced detachment, like she was ordering throw pillows online or making brunch plans with someone who wouldn't bleed on the kitchen floor. I felt invisible. Funny, isn't it? You build a life from scratch, brick by brick. Sacrifice everything for your family. And all it takes is one exhausted moment to realize you're no longer the hero of the story. You're just another old man in the corner, quiet. Dispensable? I shuffled toward the hallway. My legs ached, but it wasn't the pain that slowed me. It was the weight of knowing. Every step I took dragged behind it the memory of every bill I paid, every tantrum I weathered, every meal I cooked, every nightmare I calmed. In the hallway, the house felt unfamiliar. It smelled the same. Lemongrass diffuser in the wall socket, a faint echo of laundry detergent from the dryer. But emotionally, it had changed. Something about the air was colder now, as if the walls themselves were trying to distance themselves from me. There's a saying you hear a lot as you get older. You're only as old as you feel. Well, that day I felt ancient, not just in years, but in obsolescence. I reached my bedroom and gently closed the door behind me. My fingers brushed the frame, solid oak. I had installed it myself 20 years ago. Haley was 10. She helped stain it with a foam brush and got paint all over her elbows. I smiled at the memory for a heartbeat, then felt the smile turn brittle and drop. On the dresser sat a photo of Sarah, my late wife. She looked back at me with that quiet strength she'd always had. Sarah had been the one with the patience, the heart, long-view wisdom. She would have seen this coming years ago. Me, I just wanted them to be happy, comfortable, safe. Well, they were comfortable now, all right. Comfortable enough to ignore their father asking for water like he was a hotel guest who'd overstayed checkout. I sat on the bed and looked at the nightstand drawer. I hadn't opened it in years. It held old receipts, manuals for appliances I no longer owned, and something more important than I ever realized, a soft creak of the drawer, the rustle of yellowing paper. And there it was, the deed, signed, notarized, witnessed 5 years ago. I had given them the house, yes, but there was fine print. Language my lawyer, Michael O'Connor, had insisted on. Standard family clause, he had said. Reversionary conditions in case anything goes wrong. Back then I had waved him off. Nothing will go wrong, Mike, it's family. He had smiled but not agreed. I study the document now like it was some ancient scripture. It had a clause, a small but powerful, that returned the house to me under certain conditions. Neglect, mistreatment, failure to provide agreed-upon care. A single paragraph buried on page 3, but suddenly it felt like a lifeline. I read it 3 times just to be sure. My hands trembled. But this time it wasn't from surgery, it was from possibility. I looked back at Sarah's photo. "You'd have told me sooner," I whispered. "You always read the fine print. There's something old folks know that the young forget. We don't get weak with age. We just get quiet. It's not that we've run out of strength. It's that we're tired of wasting it on people who don't deserve it." And now, I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being disappointed, done hoping, done wishing they'd remember who I was. Now I was planning. Here's a fun, unrelated fact. Lobsters, those crusty sea insects, don't biologically age the way we do. They don't weaken. They just keep growing until something else kills them. Usually a pot of boiling water. Sometimes I think old men are like that. We grow, we endure, and then one day we snap. But I wasn't going in a pot. I picked up the landline, the one they never used because it wasn't smart, and dialed the number I hadn't used in years. Michael answered on the second ring. "Richardson?" he said, voice groggy. "It's Saturday. Mike, I need you here today. Something's gone wrong." He paused, just long enough to make me wonder if I was being dramatic. "I'll be there in an hour," he said. I hung up, looked around my room. Same 4 walls, same memories, same house. But everything was about to change, because while they sat downstairs sipping coffee and pretending this was still theirs, I was up here with the documents, with the law, with my mind cleared not by rest but by betrayal. They thought they'd broken me. They had no idea I just stood up. The knock at the door came right as the grandfather clock struck 10. Not a minute early, not a second late. Michael O'Connor was nothing if not precise, a quality that until today had only mattered when it came to filing taxes and notarizing signatures. Now, it might just save my life. I shuffled to the front door before Haley or Keon could intercept. I didn't want them nosing around. They thought I was upstairs napping. Instead, I was about to wage quiet war with a manila folder and a handshake. Michael stepped inside with a leather briefcase and the kind of expression that says, "I skipped breakfast for this, so it better be important." He looked the same, gray at the temples, sharp in the eyes, smelling faintly of mint and courtrooms. "You look like hell," he said by way of greeting. "I feel worse," I replied. He sat on the couch, my couch, and opened his briefcase with the efficiency of a man who knew exactly where the important pieces were buried. I handed him the deed and pointed to the clause with a shaking finger. He read in silence, nodding once, then again. "You remember this?" I asked. "I wrote it," he said, "and I'm very glad I did. We didn't waste time with sentiment. Legally," he began, "you still own this house. Haley's title was conditional. It was a gift with reversion clauses tied to treatment and care obligations." I looked over his shoulder, toward the kitchen, where I could hear them laughing. "What exactly are we talking about here?" I asked. Michael leaned forward. "If you can demonstrate a material breach, neglect, mistreatment, verbal abuse, then you can initiate reversion proceedings. The house comes back to you." He paused, "and you can ask them to leave." I stared at him. "How soon?" "With proper notice and documentation, 30 days. I blinked. The timeline seemed surreal. I had spent the past 5 days asking for a single glass of water. Now I could ask for something else entirely. Their absence. Michael gathered the papers into a clean stack. "But Richard, are you sure this isn't just a legal maneuver? It's a declaration of war." He was right. This was no longer about ownership. This was about dignity, respect, a man's place in his own house. I nodded. "I want to test them," I said. "One last time. See if anything has changed. If not," he said, standing, "you'll have all the paperwork ready." Before he left, he handed me a small stack of documents. Instructions, contact information, notes about potential evidence I should gather. "Don't confront them yet, just observe. Document." I took the papers, my fingers feeling steadier than they had in days. After he left, I sat in silence for nearly an hour. The television buzzed in the background. Another mindless game show. The kind where people cheer for prizes they didn't earn. The metaphor wrote itself. I stood finally and moved to the hallway. My chest ached, but my steps were firm. In the kitchen, Haley was pouring iced tea. Keon was on the couch, flipping through a magazine about golf clubs he couldn't afford. "Perfect," I smiled gently. "Could one of you grab me a glass of water while you're up?" Haley didn't look up from the pitcher. "Seriously? It's just a glass of water," I said. "You're not incapable," Keon muttered. "You walked to the kitchen just fine yesterday." Haley rolled her eyes. "This again. Are we supposed to wait on you now?" My hands didn't shake this time. My voice didn't waver. "I just had heart surgery. Asking for water isn't unreasonable." "You need to stop milking that," Keon snapped. "You're not dying. You're recovering." That was it. The test was over. They hadn't changed. Not one bit. Not a hint of reflection. Not a shred of remorse. I gave a short nod and turned away. The request hadn't been about thirst. It had been about hope. And they failed. Again. Let me tell you something odd about hope. It's not endless. It regenerates, yes, but only if it's met with even a little effort from the other side. When it's ignored long enough, it dies. Quietly. Permanently. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of pain or nightmares, but because I couldn't wait. I gathered what Michael had left. Printed copies of the deed, documentation instructions, a lined notepad for writing down incidents, even voice memo ideas in case I needed to record something. My war chest. They'd think I was just a tired old man with fading strength and too many memories. But what they didn't know? Old men don't give up, we just retreat to higher ground. Here's a fact I learned from a university study once. older adults, when faced with crisis, are more likely to strategize than react emotionally. It's not wisdom, it's survival. And survival, it's something I had gotten very, very good at. As I lay in bed with the papers beside me, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was awake to the truth of my family, awake to the legal power I'd forgotten I had, awake to the realization that this story wasn't ending with silence and neglect. It was just beginning, and this time, I was writing it. Morning broke with the kind of quiet that usually means something is about to go terribly wrong or gloriously right. The light streamed through the blinds in narrow ribbons, dancing across the legal documents stacked neatly beside my bed. Today, the clock started ticking. 30 days. But the way my hands itched for action, I knew I wouldn't need all of them. I got out of bed slowly, testing the pain across my chest like a man pushing at bruised memories. The soreness was still there, but dull now. Background noise compared to what I'd felt in the kitchen the day before. Funny how the heart heals faster when it's filled with purpose. Downstairs, Haley was already up. I could hear her pacing. Her slippers made soft, hushing sounds across the laminate floor like she didn't want to wake guilt. Or maybe the man whose house she thought she still owned. I watched her from the hallway, just for a moment. She had that same impatient energy she'd had as a child. Back then, it had been about waiting for birthday cake. Now, it was probably because Keon hadn't taken out the trash. Some things age, some things just rot. She spotted me and gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sleep okay? Like a lawyer holding an ace, I said. She didn't get the reference. I moved to the table, slowly and deliberately, and took a seat. They'd know something was off soon, if they hadn't already suspected. But I had one more play to make before I revealed the hand. I've been thinking about the future, I said, sipping the coffee she didn't offer. Keon looked up from his phone. Yeah? Thinking about arrangements where everyone stands. Haley's eyes narrowed slightly. You mean your will? I shrugged. Something like that. Now that was interesting. The moment I mentioned arrangements, her entire body tensed, like someone had whispered there was a hidden camera in the room. She sat down too, crossing her legs, suddenly invested. Well, you know, she began, all sugar and silk. We want what's best for you. Of course you do, I thought. I gave her nothing. Just a soft nod, and a look like I was a confused man pondering his future, not a father waiting for the legal clock to chime. I'll be meeting with Michael O'Connor again next week, I said casually, just to make sure the paperwork's clean. Keon stiffened. Michael, the lawyer. That's the one. Thought you were done with all that. You already gifted us the house, didn't you? Haley asked, her voice overly calm. I did. I smiled. Under certain conditions. The silence that followed stretched longer than it should have. Haley cleared her throat. Well, we're here, aren't we? I mean, we help. I muttered, making a note in my mind of the date and time. I was documenting now, not just with words, but with every choice I made. If they gave me more evidence, I'd take it graciously, and they always did. That afternoon, I tried again. Would one of you mind getting the mail? Keon didn't even look up. I'm in the middle of something, Haley shrugged. You could probably use the steps. Good for circulation. I walked out the door myself, chest aching but mind worrying. At the mailbox, I found a catalog, an envelope from the bank, and a moment of privacy. Across the street, Joshua Palmer was trimming his hedge. He saw me, gave a nod. I nodded back, then raised 2 fingers, an old signal from our Sunday poker days. 2 meant, watch my back. He squinted, tilted his head, then gave the faintest nod of understanding. Witness established. That night, I pretended to forget where the glasses were. "Haley, could you grab me one?" She exhaled sharply. "You lived here longer than I have. You know where the glasses are." I smiled. "Strike 3. Now let me pause here and tell you an odd fact. The Amazon molly, an all-female species of fish, reproduces by cloning itself. No need for males. No need for mating rituals. Just endless copies of itself, generation after generation. In moments like these, I wished I had that ability. Not to clone myself, but to clone the version of my daughter I once loved. The child who cried when I scraped my knee, who held my hand when Sarah passed, who whispered, "I'll take care of you when you're old, Daddy." That version was gone, replaced by entitlement and exhaustion and a man beside her who wore my furniture like it was his birthright. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling fan. It clicked softly as it turned, like a metronome counting down a finale. There's something in old age they never warn you about. Clarity becomes painful. Once you truly see people, it's nearly impossible to unsee them. But clarity is also power. And now, with every petty act, every cruel comment, every glass of water I never got, they were handing me ammunition, because I didn't just want them out. I wanted them to know why. I wanted them to feel it, the realization, the weight, the loss, and the bitter taste of what they had thrown away. Michael returned on Monday morning, briefcase in hand and a thermos of black coffee that smelled like courtroom vengeance. He set it down on my kitchen table without a word and began pulling out documents. Papers with seals and signatures and more power than any punch I could have thrown back in my youth. "Everything's ready," he said, sliding the top document toward me. "This is the formal notice of revocation." I didn't touch it yet. Not because I had doubts, but because I needed to savor this moment. The paper itself was unassuming, white with neat, symmetrical text and a heavy letterhead. But what it represented was something I hadn't had since Sarah's death: control. "Do they have to sign anything to make it real?" I asked. Michael shook his head. "No. You've got clauses in your original gift deed that allow for unilateral revocation under material breach. All we have to do is serve them." He said it like it was an Amazon package. "Just serve them." I leaned back in the chair that used to be mine until Keon started calling it his spot. "They won't see this coming." "No," Michael said, his voice clipped. "But they should have." He paused, glancing toward the hallway, where the distant hum of Haley's hairdryer buzzed faintly like a swarm of wasps. "Are you sure you don't want someone else here when you deliver the notice?" "I want to do it myself," I said. He nodded slowly, then added, "Just remember, serve, don't argue. Funny thing about old age. People think you forget how to throw a punch, when in truth, you just learned to throw it with paper." Michael packed his things, handed me a business card with the process server's contact info, just in case, and left. I sat at the table, breathing slow and steady. The legal envelope stared back at me. No fanfare, no trumpet blare. Just the silent weight of irreversible change. And then came the perfect timing. Haley and Keon walked into the kitchen, bickering over who forgot to pay the phone bill. Keon's laugh was dry and careless, You know, your dad's probably still upset about the water thing, he said. Haley snorted. He'll forget by next week, he always does. They didn't notice the envelope until I placed it gently on the kitchen island. What's this? Haley asked, eyeing it the way people eye spiders on the ceiling, small, still, and threatening. I didn't answer right away. I picked up my coffee and took a sip. It had gone cold. Appropriate. You've got 72 hours, I said. Keon blinked. What? That's a formal eviction notice, I said, more calmly than I felt. You're no longer welcome in my house. Haley's face twisted in confusion. You mean our house? No, I replied, meeting her eyes. My house always was. The title was conditional. You failed to meet those conditions. She reached for the envelope like it might explode. Is this a joke? Read it, I said. She scanned the first page and immediately lost a shade of color. Keon snatched it from her hands and did the same. You can't be serious, he growled. You locked me in my room, I said. You took my phone. You lied to the police. You made me feel like a squatter in the house I bought with the money your mother left behind. Haley looked up. We didn't mean to, but you did. I cut in, repeatedly, and now the law is on my side. The sound of the refrigerator hum filled the silence. Keon slammed the envelope back onto the island. This is our home, he said through gritted teeth. No, I replied. This is where I live. You just treated it like yours. They both stood there, stunned. Not crying. Not shouting. Just stunned. Because deep down they knew. I watched them struggle for words, for excuses, for control. But I had already taken it back. And now for your elder wisdom of the day. Regret is often too late to matter, but the absence of respect is never forgotten. My grandfather used to say that when we'd visit the family farm long before I knew what it meant. Now I understood. Completely. Where are we supposed to go? Haley asked, finally, her voice small. That's not my responsibility anymore, I said. You made sure of that when you left me gasping after surgery while you watched reruns of Family Feud. Dad, please, let's talk this through, she said. I tried for days. I asked for water and you gave me contempt. Keon opened his mouth again, probably to blame it on stress or Haley or the moon's gravitational pull. I held up a hand. You have 72 hours. After that, a sheriff will be involved. I walked out of the kitchen and let the quiet follow me like a robe of armor. Now, an odd fact to keep in your pocket. In the 1800s, rats were sometimes used as legal witnesses in murder trials. Believe it or not. The logic? If rats were seen leaving a house in droves, something rotten was likely inside. Well, let's just say I was hoping for the same reaction here. That night, I placed a fresh glass of water on my nightstand. I didn't drink it. I just wanted to remember what it felt like to be able to ask for it and not be denied. Because that little glass, it wasn't water anymore. It was freedom. The first 24 hours passed like a slow earthquake. Silent, but shifting everything beneath the surface. Haley barely spoke to me. Keon kept walking past me like I was a broom closet someone had left open. But the energy in the house had changed. Where once they walked with confidence, now they moved with caution. Like they were afraid of waking something up. They weren't wrong. By the following morning, I noticed boxes beginning to appear. Not enough to mean they were taking it seriously, but enough to show they had started the panic rituals. a few dishes wrapped in newspaper, an old suitcase dragged out of the attic. A half-hearted attempt at pretending they had options. Good. Let them sweat. I made my coffee and walked slowly around the living room, taking stock of what had once been mine and what soon would be again. The couch. Bought it in 2007, right after Sarah finished chemo. The rug. A gift from my brother, handmade in Turkey. The bookshelf. Built it with my own hands. And yet, for the past few years, I'd been made to feel like a trespasser in my own museum. Now, the museum was closing, and the exhibit of entitled adult children was being permanently removed. I went back upstairs and began my own packing, not of clothes or keepsakes, but of records. I opened a dusty bin in the closet and pulled out folders with receipts, utility bills, copies of checks I'd written for Haley's college tuition, her wedding, Keon's failed business, even the time I bailed them out of a late mortgage payment without them knowing. Each sheet of paper told a story, and all of them pointed to one undeniable truth. I hadn't just given them a house. I'd built a life around making sure they had one. And in return, they had given me a version of themselves so cheap and careless, it might as well have come free with a fast food combo meal. Just after noon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Joshua, my neighbor, holding a Tupperware dish wrapped in foil. "Brought you something," he said, lifting the lid to reveal a full-baked ziti. My wife made extra. I smiled. "Thanks. Not many people bring food to the man doing the evicting," he chuckled. "Well, I figured after that window stunt and the police visit, you could use some backup calories." We sat on the porch like we used to back when Sarah was still alive. I told him the full story, no drama, just facts. His face shifted from disbelief to quiet anger. "I watched my uncle go through something like this," he said. "Only he didn't have a lawyer, just a cane and a pile of guilt." "Yeah, well," I said, stabbing at the pasta with a plastic fork. "The cane's coming later." We shared a laugh. Sometimes old men laugh not because things are funny, but because laughter is the last way we know how to say, "I'm still here." That night, I took another slow walk through the house. The walls seemed quieter, more respectful. Maybe it was in my head, or maybe the house itself was grateful to finally be listened to. Let me tell you an old man's truth. Houses have memories. They remember kindness and cruelty. They remember slammed doors and dinners skipped. This one remembered Sarah's gentle touch, her Sunday morning music, the way she hung wind chimes on the porch. It remembered me as a man who fixed broken tiles and made soup from scratch, and it remembered them as the people who locked its owner in a bedroom and took his phone like a kid grounded for bad behavior. That memory would linger in the wood. Now, for your daily, weird but true fact, sloths can hold their breath longer than dolphins. 6 minutes. That's how slow and deliberate their bodies are. And that's what I'd become. A human sloth, waiting in deliberate silence, while my predators packed their boxes under a false sense of security. Keon finally approached me around 9 p.m. He wore a serious expression, the kind he usually reserved for car problems and lost remotes. "Can we talk?" he asked. I motioned toward the dining table. He sat, crossed his arms, then uncrossed them, shifted in the chair. I think you're making a mistake. Because you're being held accountable? Because we're family," he said, as if that word still had currency in this house. "Funny," I said. "I remember saying that when I handed you the keys. You said I'd always have a place here." His face twitched. "We were stressed. Stressed people reveal who they really are." I replied. He stood up, frustrated, but not angry. Not yet. That would come later. Right now, he was still in the bargaining phase. Okay, he said. You made your point. You got us scared. Congrats. But we can change. Haley's just emotional. She was emotional when she told me to get my own water. And when she locked me in my room, was that emotions too? I didn't agree with that, he muttered, but you didn't stop it either. That's the thing about passive cruelty. It's just as bad as the active kind. A bystander is still a brick in the wall that traps you. He left the room, and I went back to my notes. Michael had said to document everything, even these talks. So I wrote, Day 2. Keon attempted negotiation, cited stress and emotions. No apology. No mention of locking me in bedroom. No change in behavior. A strange thing happens when you become a man with a plan. Even the pain in your body starts cooperating. The soreness in my chest felt lighter, more manageable. My knees creaked less. My breath came easier. Not because I was getting stronger, but because I had purpose again. That's something I've learned about aging. People don't die from old age. They die from irrelevance. Once you're treated like you don't matter, the body takes the hint. But I was mattering again, and they had 48 hours left to understand exactly what that meant. By the time the third day began, the house had taken on the stillness of a waiting room, tense, silent, and full of people pretending everything was fine when it absolutely was not. The kind of quiet you get before a hurricane or a verdict. Haley moved around the kitchen slower now, like the floor might shatter beneath her heels. Keon avoided eye contact entirely, retreating into his phone like it could text him a way out of this. They hadn't packed much more, still in denial, still clinging to the idea that I might change my mind, but I was beyond changing my mind. Now I was documenting their final moments in my house like a historian, chronicling the fall of an empire. The empire of entitled children, crumbling under the weight of their own assumptions. I sat at the breakfast nook, quietly eating toast, when Haley entered with a new strategy. Sympathy. You okay, Dad? She asked, voice sugar-dipped. I'm fine, I said, buttering my toast without looking up. Never better. She lingered, mug in hand. You've been writing a lot lately. Are you journaling or documenting? I said plainly. For court, if it comes to that. That stopped her short. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. But of course she didn't. She knew the man who paid bills silently, not the one who gathered evidence. She'd grown used to the father who said yes without hesitation, not the one who said no with a paper trail. She blinked. Court? Legal process, I said. You have 24 hours now, then we begin formal eviction procedures. And here came the tears. Real? I don't know. At that point, it didn't matter. But where are we supposed to go? She whispered. I looked at her. This grown woman who had once sat on my shoulders in the park, who had fallen asleep against my chest during thunderstorms. And I felt nothing, not hatred, not affection, just the hollow ache of recognition. The girl I loved was gone, and the woman in front of me had never truly replaced her. That's up to you, I said. You chose this outcome when you chose cruelty over care. She walked away, quiet as snow. Let me pause to tell you a truth we old folks live by. Apologies without change are manipulation. And in 3 days, Not once had they asked me, genuinely, what they could do to make things right. They just wanted to avoid consequences. And that's not love. That's damage control. That afternoon, they tried one more trick, recasting the narrative. Keon called a friend on speakerphone, loud enough for me to hear from the living room. "Yeah, man, he's been acting really off," Keon said casually. "Surgery messed with his memory, I think. Keeps saying weird stuff about the house. Thinks he can kick us out or something." I walked in mid-conversation and locked eyes with him. "I can," I said, "and I am." He froze. "It's not what it sounds like." "No," I said slowly. "It's exactly what it sounds like." Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out a recorder and clicked it on. "Please repeat that for the record," I said calmly. He turned pale. "What are you doing?" "Protecting myself," I replied, "the way no one else in this house has bothered to." He stormed out, muttering under his breath. But that was fine. Let him boil. Boiling water eventually evaporates. Later, I called Michael and updated him on everything. The phone call lasted exactly 12 minutes. "Perfect," he said at the end. "You've got everything. We'll move forward if they're not out by tomorrow evening." And now let me share a very peculiar fact. Honey never spoils. Archaeologists have found 3,000-year-old honey in Egyptian tombs that's still edible. Eternal sweetness locked in time. I used to think family was like that. Resilient, preservable. But now I know better. Family only lasts if everyone keeps adding sweetness. If one side just takes and never gives back. Eventually, all that's left is dust. By the end of the evening, they'd packed 2 more boxes, clothes, some toiletries, and a set of towels I recognized from our old beach trips. They were moving slowly, hoping for a miracle. There would be none. That night, I returned to my room and pulled open Sarah's memory box. Letters, cards, her will, and tucked among them, the life insurance paperwork I hadn't touched in years. I read every line again. I needed to. I needed to remind myself why I'd given them the house in the first place. Because Sarah wanted them to be safe. She'd believed in them. She would have cried if she saw what they had become. And that brought back something I hadn't felt in days. Not anger, not hurt, grief. Because this wasn't just an eviction. It was a funeral. A funeral for the version of family we used to be. And in the silence of my room, under the hum of the ceiling fan and the moonlight cutting through the blinds, I whispered something aloud for the first time. "Sarah, I tried." The next morning felt heavier than the others, as though the house itself understood what was coming. The air carried a tension that reminded me of thunderstorms back when I was a kid. Thick, electric, and waiting to strike. I sat in my armchair, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, while the 2 of them whispered in the kitchen like burglars planning a heist they weren't smart enough to pull off. I could hear snippets. "He can't do this. Maybe he's bluffing. We should call someone." It was almost comical. These 2 adults, both younger, stronger, and healthier than I was, whispering about how to hold on to a house that didn't belong to them anymore. I wasn't bluffing. Not even a little. At 10 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Joshua, my neighbor, stepped inside with a determined look. "You ready?" he asked. He had volunteered to stand witness when I served them formally. A backup pair of eyes. Someone who could see past their inevitable performance. I nodded. "Let's do this." We walked into the kitchen together. Haley turned at the sound of our footsteps, her face pale. "What's going on?" I held up the documents. "This is your final notice. You have until tomorrow evening to leave this house." Keon stepped forward, puffing his chest like a rooster. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, cutting him off with a calmness that made him stop cold. "And I will. The law is very clear. Joshua here is a witness to the delivery of this notice." Haley's voice cracked. "Dad, you don't understand. We're your family. We're all you have left." "Family," I said, my voice low, "doesn't lock their father in a bedroom because he tells them to leave. Family doesn't make him beg for water after heart surgery. Family doesn't lie to police to cover their own cruelty." The words landed like stones. Keon grabbed the envelope and skimmed the first page. I watched his lips move as he read, his eyes growing darker with each line. "This is insane," he muttered. "This is... You can't do this to your own daughter." "Watch me," I said. He slammed the envelope on the counter. Haley flinched. I saw tears forming in her eyes, but I didn't waver. I'd been through worse pain in the hospital, and this was surgery of a different kind. Cutting out rot before it spread further. Joshua crossed his arms. "You've got 24 hours. I'd take this seriously if I were you." Haley looked at me, desperate. "Dad, where are we supposed to go?" "Anywhere," I said softly, "anywhere but here." There was a long silence, broken only by the hum of the fridge. Then Haley stormed off and Keon followed, muttering curses under his breath. By the afternoon, they were avoiding me like I was a storm they hoped would pass. But I wasn't passing. I was the house itself, standing firm while they scrambled like loose shutters in the wind. I sat outside on the porch with Joshua, watching the clouds gather in the distance. "Think they'll go quietly?" he asked. I shook my head. "They're too used to getting their way." "Want me to stick around tomorrow when the deadline hits?" he offered. I smiled faintly. "I might take you up on that," Joshua chuckled. "Feels like we're planning a siege." "More like an exorcism," I said. That evening, I walked into the living room where they sat sulking. "I want you to understand something," I began. "This isn't about revenge. This is about respect. I gave you everything. This house, money, my time. And what did I get back? Contempt." Haley's lips trembled. "We were stressed. Stress doesn't make people cruel," I said. "It just shows who they really are." Keon glared at me but stayed silent. Good. For once he understood the value of silence. Now here's a strange fact for you. Bees can recognize human faces. They remember kindness and aggression. Treat them well, and they'll work with you. Treat them poorly, and they'll sting. People aren't so different. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of Sarah again. I could almost hear her voice in the room. "You're doing the right thing. Don't let them break you." I closed my eyes and let the thought carry me into a restless sleep. Tomorrow was the 72-hour mark, and I was ready. The morning of the deadline arrived, dressed in sunlight, but the house itself felt dark. Not literally, no. The windows still caught the glow, the walls still stood. But something invisible had shifted. The air was heavy with finality, like a breath you take just before jumping off a ledge, knowing there's no coming back. I didn't eat breakfast. Didn't need to. Sometimes justice is filling enough. Haley and Keon didn't emerge from their room until almost 11 a.m. Maybe they were hoping that if they stayed hidden long enough, I'd just forget about the law, about the documents, about the disrespect. But I wasn't forgetting anything. They walked into the kitchen together. No words, just tight mouths and the thinnest veil of civility. Keon grabbed a mug. Haley stood at the fridge, pretending to look for something that wasn't there. And I waited. At exactly noon, I stood from my chair, crossed the room, and opened the drawer that held the envelope. "You have 6 hours left," I said. The words didn't land like an explosion. They landed like a clock ticking on a bomb. Steady. Inevitable. Keon scoffed. "What are you going to do? Drag us out with a walker?" "No," I said. "But I called the sheriff's department this morning. They're aware if you're still here at 6 p.m., they'll be involved." Haley turned slowly, her face pale but defiant. "Dad, this is insane. We're your family. And this," I said, holding up the envelope, "is your warning. Again, you had 72 hours. That time is almost gone." She didn't respond, just stared at me with eyes that had once begged for bedtime stories and now looked like windows in a house with no furniture, cold and empty. Keon dropped his mug in the sink a little too hard. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Not unbelievable," I said, "just overdue." By 2 p.m., the packing began in earnest. Haley was in the upstairs bedroom, stuffing clothes into suitcases with the speed I hadn't seen in days. Keon made trips back and forth from the garage to the living room, piling boxes with a kind of righteous frustration as though he were being wronged. As though this whole eviction were some cruel injustice imposed upon two perfect saints. I watched from the hallway silent. You know, there's an old man's trick to knowing when someone's really sorry. It's not in the words, it's in the hands. People who feel guilt move slowly, gently. Their fingers tremble a little when they touch things they've been told not to take for granted. Haley's hands were quick, rough. She was angry, not sorry. She packed her grief like someone stuffing a suitcase after a bad vacation. Good. Let her feel it. Let me offer today's strange fact. Elephants mourn their dead. They will return to the bones of lost herd members and gently touch them with their trunks. They don't forget. Neither do I. At 4 p.m., I sat in the backyard watching the wind stir the leaves. I held Sarah's photo in my lap. Her smile hadn't changed. She looked as alive in that frame as she had the day we signed the mortgage papers. She believed in them, and I had too, until now. I heard the screen door creak open behind me. Soft footsteps. I didn't turn around. "Dad," Haley said. I let her stand there in the quiet for a few seconds. Let her choose her words carefully. I wasn't going to help her this time. She started. "I want you to know I didn't mean for it to get this far. That makes two of us," I said. She exhaled sharply like a balloon deflating. "We were stressed. We were scared. We thought you'd be okay." "You thought I'd be compliant," I corrected. "There's a difference." She came around to face me. Her face was red, eyes glossy. And for a brief second, I saw something familiar. Not my daughter, but the girl she used to be. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything." I studied her. "You said something to me the other day," I said. "You said we're not your servants. Remember that?" She looked down ashamed. "Yes, I didn't need a servant," I said. I needed a daughter. Someone who could see me as a man still worth a glass of water. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She nodded. I know, she said, but I didn't answer, because sometimes people only know after it's too late. At 5:45 p.m., the last box was loaded into the back seat of their car. Keon didn't say goodbye. He walked past me with the stiffness of a man walking around a grave he doesn't want to admit he dug. Haley paused at the door. She held the house keys in her hand. She offered them to me slowly, like they might bite her. These belong to you, she said softly. They always did, I replied. Her fingers released the keys. They landed in my palm with a weight that was more than metal. She stood there for a moment, waiting. For forgiveness, for a hug, for something I wasn't offering. Will you ever talk to me again? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at her the way I might look at a photograph faded with time. Still visible, but no longer part of the present. I don't know, I said honestly. She nodded and for once didn't argue. Then she walked out the door. And just like that, the house was mine again. Not just legally, but spiritually, emotionally, totally. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. And it was beautiful. After they left, I didn't move right away. I sat on the couch, the house keys still in my hand, listening to the emptiness. It wasn't sad, not even lonely. It was clean, like a fog had lifted. For the first time in years, there were no footsteps overhead, no blaring televisions in rooms I once called mine, no passive-aggressive sighs behind me at the dinner table, just silence and my breath. It's strange how stillness can feel like triumph. I walked slowly through the house, my house, room by room, like a museum curator reacquainting himself with the collection. The living room was still a little cluttered from their packing, but I didn't rush to clean it. I wanted the boxes gone, yes, but I wanted to sit with the memory too. The image of them scrambling, of panic under pressure. It was proof that consequences had arrived. In the kitchen, I made myself a cup of tea. Just one. No one to offer another cup to. No one to interrupt. I opened a drawer, found the old floral mug Sarah used to love, and poured the hot water slowly. The steam rose up like incense from a quiet ritual. This house, it seemed, was breathing again. Upstairs, the guest room stood empty. So did their bedroom. The closet was bare, except for a wire hanger and a single sock they had missed. I almost laughed. The sock looked ridiculous, abandoned, and forgotten. But in some small, poetic way, it felt symbolic. They took everything they thought mattered and left behind the things they didn't even see. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at that room. I had imagined grandkids sleeping in there someday. I had imagined joy, family dinners, movie nights. I had imagined Haley smiling, grateful. I had imagined her making me tea when I was weak, not mocking me for needing help. What I got instead was entitlement with a wedding ring. But here's the odd truth about being old. You don't grieve the future for what it becomes. You grieve it for what it never had the chance to be. I closed the door gently. Later, I stepped out into the yard. The breeze was soft and the air smelled like rain, even though the sky was still clear. Joshua was outside too, watering his azaleas. He looked up and gave me a quiet nod. Everything go okay? He asked. They're gone. He nodded again. Place looks different already. It feels different, I said. Cleaner. Need help changing the locks? Already called a guy, I replied. He's coming tomorrow. Joshua leaned on his rake. You did something most people don't have the guts to do. I shook my head. I just did what I should have done months ago. He shrugged. Still counts. We stood there for a minute, not speaking. The kind of silence only old men can share, without discomfort. You know, he said, when we first met, I thought you were the quiet type. I was, I said. Then someone tried to steal my silence and call it theirs. Back inside, I opened the folder from Michael again. Everything was in order. The official letter, the revocation deed, the sheriff notice template in case they returned. I'd even started adding handwritten notes for future estate planning. Not because I feared more betrayal, but because I'd finally remembered that my life wasn't over just because I was old. You know what's funny? People think age makes you weaker, but really, age just makes you quieter about your strength. Until the moment comes when you have to roar. That night, I lit a candle in the living room. Not for ceremony, just for warmth. I sat in my old recliner, one hand on Sarah's picture, the other still holding the keys they'd given back. These were not just house keys. These were keys to my dignity, my boundaries, my peace. And I had taken them back. Here's your odd fact of the day. Octopuses will sometimes collect shells and use them as armor. Not because they're afraid, but because they're smart enough to know not to get hurt in the first place. Well, I suppose I just became an octopus. A very slow, very grumpy, legally fortified octopus. At bedtime, I walked the house one last time. I turned off lights, locked doors, shut windows, not to keep people out, but to remind the house and myself that it was safe again. In the mirror, I saw something unexpected. Not the tired old man they thought I was, but someone alive again. Someone no longer waiting for kindness from people who'd forgotten how to give it. And as I pulled the blanket over me, I whispered something I hadn't said in years. I'm proud of you. Not to Sarah, not to Haley, not even to Michael. To me, because I hadn't just survived betrayal. I had ended it. The locksmith arrived promptly at 9 a.m. the next day. Young guy, maybe in his late 20s, with shaggy hair and a quiet demeanor. He shook my hand gently like he was worried I might shatter. You the one changing out all 3 locks? He asked, stepping back to admire the front door. Yes, I said. And while you're at it, let's change the garage code and the side door too. He raised an eyebrow. Bad tenants? Worse, I replied. Bad family. He didn't ask any more questions. The clinks and clicks of tools twisting metal filled the quiet of the morning. I stood there, watching, hands in my pockets, feeling more secure with every turn of his wrench. With every old bolt he removed, I could almost feel the memory of their voices loosening from the walls. Haley's snide tone, Keon's disinterested muttering. Gone like rust. You keepin' the old keys? The locksmith asked. No, I said. Toss them, because sometimes the past isn't worth saving. Sometimes it's better to let it fall into the bin and clang against old screws and worn-out parts. Later, I walked around the house with a notepad in hand, taking stock like a man reclaiming lost land. The living room reorganized. Their decor, cheap canvas prints and metallic accents that screamed Instagram, had been piled near the back door. I would donate them or dump them. Either worked. The kitchen mine again. No more arguments over which almond milk brand was the right one. No more leftovers from takeout I hadn't touched. No more empty promises scribbled on sticky notes left beside the sink. The hallway was quiet. The photos on the wall were still there. Family pictures from before everything changed. Haley in her graduation gown. Sarah on the porch with a lemonade in hand. Me, holding up the keys to this house when we first bought it. I studied those photos now, wondering how long we had been lying to ourselves. Because when betrayal creeps in, it doesn't announce itself. It arrives slowly in sighs and eye rolls, in unreturned favors and selfish mornings. It settles into the crevices like dust, until one day you realize everything looks dull, and by then, you're choking on it. At noon, I got a call from Michael. "Everything go smoothly?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "House is secured. And your daughter?" "Gone, along with her excuses." He didn't gloat, good lawyers never do. But there was satisfaction in his tone. "I'm filing the final notice today just to cover our bases," he said. "And Richard..." "Yeah? You did the hard part, don't forget that." I thanked him and hung up. There's an odd sense of loss that comes after battle. When the adrenaline leaves, and you realize no one's coming through the front door anymore. And yet, in that silence, I felt something growing. Not grief, not bitterness, space, room for new things, new habits, maybe even new people. Here's your odd fact for the day. Sea otters hold hands when they sleep so they don't drift apart. They anchor themselves with each other to stay close through the tide. For years, I thought I had someone's hand. I thought Haley would hold on, stay close, even when life pulled at us. Turns out she let go long before I noticed. I spent the afternoon in the garage, pulling out a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were Sarah's gardening tools, a sun hat, her little journal of flower notes, page after page of simple joys. Hydrangeas doing well, marigolds late this year. Don't forget to buy compost. It made me smile. She had always known how to create beauty from dirt, and maybe that's what I'd do now, too. Around 4 p.m., I made myself a sandwich. Nothing fancy, just roast beef, some mustard, and 2 slices of rye. I ate it at the dining table, alone, but not lonely. There's a difference. Loneliness is feeling the absence of company. Solitude is feeling the presence of peace. I had the latter now. At sunset, I sat on the porch, tea in hand, and watched the sky shift from gold to fire to dusk. The breeze played with the wind chimes Sarah had hung by the gutter. They'd gone untouched for years. Now they sounded like applause. A quiet, standing ovation for boundaries drawn, for peace reclaimed. And here's something you don't learn until you're old. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone back in. It means letting go of the version of them you wished they'd been, and loving yourself enough to shut the door afterward. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hopeful either. I was calm, and that was more than enough. I rose, stretched my legs, and turned toward the house. My house, keys in my pocket, door locked behind me, and not a single part of me looking back. The next few days were quieter than I'd expected, but not in the eerie, post-storm way. No, this was a good quiet, a peaceful quiet, the kind that wraps around your bones and says you made it. I woke up on Thursday to birdsong instead of bickering. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee because I brewed it for me. No one had left a crusty pan in the sink or half-eaten yogurt on the counter. The little things, the things we never notice when we're too busy being taken for granted, had returned. Clean mugs, order, dignity. I sat by the window in my robe, sipping slowly, and it hit me. This was the first time in years that I felt like this house belonged to me, in spirit, not just on paper. It's an odd thing, you know, being alone after not being alone. The solitude feels like a person itself. It sits across from you. It watches TV with you. It waits, not intrusively, but patiently. And the best part? It never talks over you. By noon, I had started reorganizing the office. The space had become a dumping ground for Keon's gadgets and Haley's unopened Amazon returns. I found empty laptop boxes, expired warranties, tangled chargers they didn't even bother labeling. It was like walking through an archaeological site of laziness. I cleared it all, box by box, dust cloth in one hand, Sarah's old fountain pen in the other. By mid-afternoon, the desk was mine again. My papers, my books, my lamp. I opened a drawer and found an old envelope labeled in Sarah's handwriting. In case of emergency, emotional or otherwise. Inside were 3 things: a photo of her on our honeymoon, squinting in the sun, a handwritten note that said, "Don't let them mistake your kindness for weakness," and a little bundle of dried lavender, still faintly fragrant after all these years. I closed the drawer and laughed quietly. She always did have impeccable timing. That evening, I got a call from the sheriff's office. "Just checking in," the deputy said. "No issues with the eviction?" "No," I said. "It went as clean as it could have." "Glad to hear it. Most don't." That made me pause. Most don't. I suppose that's the reality most people don't want to admit. Family drama rarely ends without scars. But I'd taken the time to stitch mine. That night, I made dinner for one, and for the first time it didn't feel sad. It felt tailored. Pasta, garlic bread, a small salad. I played music from the old CD player that still lived beneath the cabinet. Jazz. Something smooth, slow. Something that didn't rush me. Midway through dinner, I thought about the old days, when we used to gather at this table, the laughter, the stories, Haley sneaking dessert early, Sarah rolling her eyes but smiling anyway. And then I thought of last week, how far we'd fallen. But here's a strange fact to chew on with your garlic bread. Salamanders can regenerate limbs. No kidding. Lose a tail, grow another. Lose part of the heart, regenerate it. I'm no salamander, but I was learning to regenerate all the same. Not limbs, not blood, but spirit. The next morning I made a to-do list. Transfer utilities back into my name. Donate Keon's abandoned dumbbells. Replace the live, laugh, love art in the hallway with a landscape photo Sarah took of the Rockies. Call the insurance guy. Start planning the garden. Yes, the garden. Sarah's garden. Her old notes were still in that spiral-bound book. She had mapped out seasons, bloom schedules, soil amendments. She loved spring the most. Not because it was colorful, but because it required hope. You don't plant something unless you believe in tomorrow. So I pulled on her gloves, still snug from the years, and went outside. The soil was dry but workable. I cleared weeds, dug up roots, planted the first bulbs, tulips, just like she would have wanted. By mid-afternoon, I was covered in dirt, and more satisfied than I'd been in months. As I stood up, groaning, stretching my back, I saw something across the street. A moving truck, not at my house, 2 doors down. And that's when it happened. A girl, young, maybe early 30s, stepped out of the truck, squinting up at her new porch. She looked over and saw me, and smiled. "Hi there," she called. "You the neighborhood welcoming committee?" "Depends," I said, wiping my hands on my pants. "You plan on locking your parents in their bedrooms?" She laughed. No? Then welcome to Maple Street." She waved. "I'm Eliza." "Richard?" I replied. She moved toward the porch with the box in her hands, and I realized something. This wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. Here's your old man wisdom for today. Every house has ghosts, but you decide whether they're welcome. You choose which memories get to linger and which ones need to be exorcised by change, by courage, or by tulips in spring soil. I looked around my house that evening and saw no ghosts, just space and a future and peace. The following morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened all the windows, not just cracked, wide open, every last one of them. The breeze rolled in like a guest who hadn't visited in decades, brushing against the curtains, stirring the scent of lavender and old pine. The house exhaled, and so did I. It wasn't just about letting air in. It was about letting the residue of them out. You might not think of cruelty as something that lingers, but it does. It seeps into fabric, into the baseboards, into your own mind if you let it. But sunlight and air are powerful disinfectants. Maybe not for bacteria, but for something worse, disbelief. Because even after the locks were changed and the house was silent, a small part of me still couldn't believe it had happened. That I'd been locked in my own bedroom, that I'd begged for water and been told I wasn't a priority, that my daughter, my flesh and blood, had stood in my kitchen, wedding ring glinting, and shrugged off my recovery like I was a chore on her to-do list. But with every gust of wind and flicker of curtain, that part of me loosened and finally let go. At around 11 a.m., a knock came at the door. Not the aggressive, urgent knock of a debt collector or a key-on comeback. This was tentative, curious. I opened it to find Eliza, the new neighbor, standing there, with a ceramic baking dish and a nervous smile. "Brought you something," she said, offering it with both hands like a peace treaty. I wasn't sure if people still did this, but you looked like the kind of person who appreciates tradition. I smiled. "Only when it involves food." She laughed. "Potato gratin, my grandmother's recipe." I motioned her in. If it came from a grandmother, it's probably got more wisdom than my lawyer. She stepped inside slowly, eyes glancing around at the walls, the hardwood, the small touches of my life. "It's lovely in here," she said. "Feels still." "Still's not a bad thing," I replied. "Still can mean steady." We sat at the table, the one that used to hold birthday cakes and tense silences. Now it held 2 plates, a casserole dish, and the fragile beginnings of something called normal. Over lunch we talked. She was a nurse, recently moved from Chicago. No kids, divorced young, trying to start fresh. "You live here long?" she asked. 27 years, I said. "Bought the place with my wife, raised my daughter here. Thought I'd be buried in the backyard." "Still might," she teased. "Only if someone else digs the hole." She laughed so hard she nearly choked on a slice of onion. And in that moment, in the echo of that laughter, I realized something shocking. I hadn't laughed like that in months, maybe years. After she left, I wrote a note in the journal Sarah had started and never finished. Day 4 post-eviction, windows open, new casserole, laughed for the first time in a long while. Hope might be growing back. I closed the journal and set it on the desk. Then I walked into the bedroom and did something even more radical. I changed the sheets, not because they were dirty, but because it was time. Time to stop sleeping in the dust of old arguments. Time to stop carrying their voices into my dreams. Time to reclaim rest, fresh sheets, fresh air. a fresh page. Here's today's odd fact. Barn owls mate for life. But if their partner dies, they'll often live alone, forever. Not out of sadness, but out of preference. They've loved once, and that was enough. I understood that Sarah had been my owl. I didn't need to replace her, but it didn't mean I couldn't share a meal with someone else. It didn't mean the house had to stay stuck in yesterday. Around sunset, I stood in the backyard looking at the flower bed. The tulip bulbs I'd planted were still buried, hidden, but they were there. I could feel them beneath the surface, waiting. And isn't that just like life? Sometimes, the most important things aren't what's blooming right now. They're what's buried, quietly preparing their return. Tomorrow, I'd call the fence guy, get the back gate replaced, maybe even stain the deck. I wasn't fixing the house for anyone else, just for me, because I deserved to live in a place that loved me back. Saturday morning brought with it something rare, a sense of rhythm. I woke not to dread, not to stress, not to that crawling sensation that someone might barge into my room demanding something or slamming a cabinet for effect, but to stillness, honest stillness, the kind you don't have to earn through compliance. I stretched. My bones cracked like old furniture, but it felt good, honest. I shuffled to the kitchen, put on the kettle, and stared out the window at the yard I now saw as mine, in every way that mattered. The garden bed lay undisturbed, the tulips still asleep beneath the surface. There's a quote I once read, something about how gardens are the slowest form of hope. I never understood it until now. You plant and you wait. And while nothing seems to change, something is always happening under the surface. Just like me, at 10 a.m., I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. Dad? Haley. Her voice was cautious, as if every syllable were made of glass. I didn't want things to end like that. They ended exactly as they had to, I said, not cruelly, but firmly. A long pause followed. I've been staying at a friend's, she said. I can't stop thinking about it, what I said, what I didn't do. And I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I want to understand. I want to get better. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't believe her, but because I didn't know if I wanted to believe her. I didn't call to come back, she added. I just wanted to say it out loud. Another long pause, then quietly, I'm sorry, Dad. And she hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand, unsure whether I felt relief, anger, sadness, or all of it braided together. But I wrote it down in the journal. Day 5. Haley called, apologized. Might be real, might not be. But I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I listened. And that's progress. That afternoon, I cleaned out the attic. The space had been left untouched for years, packed with boxes I couldn't lift before surgery. Now, I was ready, box after box of Sarah's belongings. My old tools, photos from trips we never had time to frame. I found a box labeled Haley's Room, age 10. Inside, drawings, report cards, a paper crown she wore at her birthday party, a crayon drawing of our house with a big red heart drawn over the roof. That version of her existed once, and maybe, just maybe, she could exist again, but I knew better than to chase that memory. Instead, I kept one drawing, her stick figure family smiling under a sky full of stars, and tucked it into my desk drawer. Not because I forgave, but because I remembered. Here's a curious fact for you. Jellyfish have no hearts, no brains, no bones. And yet they've survived for over 500 million years. Sometimes it's not strength or intelligence that keeps a thing going. Sometimes it's simply persistence. By evening, I poured myself a glass of red wine, the kind Sarah used to call liquid courage, and sat on the porch watching the wind play with the trees. A few kids rode their bikes down the block, laughing, their voices cutting clean through the fading light. I thought about legacy, about how much we give, and how rarely we're thanked. But that's the burden of a parent, isn't it? We don't raise children for their gratitude. We raise them hoping they'll do better than us. And when they don't, we grieve and we learn. And if we're lucky, we heal. At dusk, Eliza stopped by with a lemon tart. "Sorry to intrude," she said. "Just figured, why waste dessert on one person? You're assuming I wouldn't eat the whole thing alone." We laughed. She stayed for tea this time. We talked about books, about travel, about how strange it is to suddenly find yourself starting over at the age when most people expect you to fade into the wallpaper. "You don't strike me as the wallpaper type," she said, sipping her tea. "I was for a while," I said, "until someone tried to paint over me." When she left, I didn't feel empty. I felt centered, balanced. There's a word I hadn't used in years: content. And for the first time since my surgery, since the glass of water that wasn't given, I felt like the glass inside me was finally full. Not overflowing, not desperate, just enough. Sunday morning arrived with light rain tapping against the windows. Gentle, like fingers reminding you to slow down. The house smelled of coffee and earth. And for a moment, I stood in the kitchen doorway, just listening. No shouting, no footsteps above, no eggshells beneath mine, just rain and breath and belonging. I sat with my coffee and opened Sarah's journal again, flipping past her planting notes to the last entry she'd ever written. It wasn't long, just a few lines. "If this house ever feels heavy, promise me you'll open the windows. Let the air in. Let go." I smiled. She always knew me too well. Later, I walked out to the garden again, the damp soil dark and fragrant beneath my shoes. I knelt slowly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the ground. Wanted to remind myself that things still grow, even after everything. The first signs of tulips were there, just green shoots. No blooms yet, but they were reaching, pushing upward, just like me. By afternoon, I'd cleaned the spare room. I rearranged the bookshelves. I framed a picture of Sarah in the garden and placed it on the mantel. And then I did something I never thought I would. I took the last box of Haley's things from the attic, the photos, the medals, the trinkets, and gently packed them into a plastic bin. I didn't throw it away. I didn't burn it in righteous fire. I just put it in the garage, out of reach but not erased, because I had learned that healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision not to let pain decorate your living room anymore. Here's your final, strange but true fact. The human heart can continue beating even after being removed from the body, if it's kept in the right conditions. Why? Because it has its own electrical system. It doesn't need the brain to tell it to keep going. It just does. I like to think that's what resilience really is. A heart still beating, even after betrayal, even after grief, even after the people you built your life for leave you behind. You beat on, As the sun broke through the clouds late that afternoon, I stood on the front porch again, keys in my pocket, house in order, soul quiet. Eliza waved from across the street. She was planting something too. Sunflowers, maybe. Something bold and bright. She caught my eye and smiled. I nodded back. No rush, no pressure. Just life unfolding. And for the first time in a long while, I stepped back inside my house and didn't look over my shoulder. No ghosts, no shadows, just walls I trusted, and the man I still was. Not the version they tried to dismiss, not the man who begged, but the one who rebuilt, the one who chose peace, and finally, the one who came home.